for joining us today to celebrate the collective genius of the 2023 Divergent Award Honorees. I'm Shelby Whitty, Founding Director of the Initiative for Literacy in a Digital Age. To diverge from traditional pedagogies and research approaches, and then to embrace the spirit of following a road less traveled, the Divergent Award for Excellence in Literacy in the Digital Age Research was established in 2016 by the Initiative for 21st Century Literacies Research to recognize the contributions of educators and scholars who have dedicated to their careers to the theoretical and practical study of 21st century literacies. The Divergent Book Award for Excellence in Literacy in a Digital Age Research was established in 2018 by the Initiative for 21st Century Literacies Research to recognize the most outstanding literacy publications that bring to the forefront the importance and impact of this work. And finally, in 2019, the Divergent Award for Excellence in Literacy Advocacy recognizes individuals or groups using digital spaces to advocate for literacy, students, and equity in all facets of academia. The Divergent Award for Excellence in Implementation for Literacy in the Digital Age was launched in 2021 under the same descriptors. Joining us today are the honorees for 2023 who will introduce themselves throughout today's event. The full list of honorees can be found at the end of our video and on our website. Each year, we tackle a question related to literacy in digital spaces, and our conversation today will center on, do we really know what we think we know about literacy in digital spaces? Stephanie, could we start with you? Do we know what we think we know?
Definitely not. In thinking about this question, one of the things that has become very clear to me in working with a lot of queer and trans youth and also adjudicated and detained youth is that there's been this accentuation for me of the degree to which we as adults, sometimes educators, assume that digital spaces are inherently engaging, inherently accessible, and that often isn't the case. There are a substantial number of digital spaces that don't support a range of literacy needs, create issues of accessibility. And what's really fascinating about what don't we know about literacy in digital spaces is that I think one thing that we don't know, that we don't appreciate, that we don't accentuate is the ways that these youth will remake these spaces, will reclaim these spaces, will restory through these spaces. And we don't necessarily value or acknowledge that as part of what they're doing. And so just to offer some brief examples, I mean, there are extensive examples of youth that have used digital spaces for organizing, for activism. There are a range of policies and laws that have gone into effect across the United States and even globally, and youth and educators too, but youth especially have used these digital spaces in really profound and remarkable ways to activate and to move and to do. As adults, frankly, we stand around wringing our hands and shrugging our shoulders. And I have a really great appreciation of late for the ways that a lot of these oppressed and marginalized youth, and in my experiences, especially trans and queer youth, they very directly engage in a lot of anti-queer, anti-trans spaces because they want to understand what the counter argument is, what the counterclaims are, and then they use those digital spaces to create new forms of literacy, new forms of composition, to restory themselves, to restory their communities. And the question, do we really know what we think we know? I don't think that we know a lot of that. And we don't ask youth enough to know, to learn ourselves, to be able to appreciate the degrees to which those things happen.
Feel free to jump in, anyone.
I'll go ahead and jump in. Thank you, Stephanie, and greetings to all of my colleagues here, and a special thank you to you, Shelby, for your vision of this award and, recognizing the researchers and the research that has receive accolades from the Divergent series. So thank you so much for that. And Stephanie, thank you for kicking it off. I want to say, of course, we don't know. And particularly as I think about my beautiful colleague and friend, Dr. Deetra Price-Dennis, and writing Advancing Racial Literacies, we were very specific, yes, as Stephanie mentioned, how young people use digital spaces to gather themselves, to protest, to, find belonging, all of those things. But I think also even about researchers, right? We don't fully understand what we know about digital spaces. And as I think, again, around race, how people who call themselves public intellectuals are using blogs or using, in the case of open letters, like these are all very important forms of literacy, of course, as activism to make change. So for example, me signing on to the protest letter against what's happening with a, African-American, curriculum. So we don't really, I think, fully understand exactly how literacy or how powerful it can be. So that's one thing, sort of in that realm of public intellectuals or even researchers and professors using it as an activist tool. But I think because it's always evolving, like there's technology that we don't even know yet, and yet young people will figure out how to use it to their advantage. And I think particularly when it comes to race and the trauma that racism brings, we don't really quite know, how we can use literacy in this space to make change. I think we're learning, and I agree with Stephanie, if we step to the side and learn from the youth, particularly trans youth, youth of color, those who are most marginalized within our education system, they will come up with ways and reasons for how to use it differently. So we're still learning, I think.
Okay, I will join the conversation. I would like to continue the same sense. Well, from our particular case here in Medellin, Colombia, we are also in a transformative understanding of what is a digital space, right? Or what digital spaces are, right? In our particular case that we are teaching and learning English, we used to think that the digital space, it could be a platform or an application for learning and teaching English, right? But nowadays, we are like understanding that it goes beyond that. Literacy help you to understand in a different way what we are expected to do as educators with our students, because they are bringing into the classroom new realities. So it's not just for being connected with internet, but with the things that emerged being in the internet, right? So we also had to realize that all the social media, all the networks, the things that they are doing in those spaces are part of the classroom. And we are like a cool, as educators to use them. So we are also understanding that those digital spaces is not just platforms or applications, but other resources, other situations that emerged to teach English in our particular way. That's what we do in LSLP, like trying to understand that it's not just connecting with the internet, but the things that happens through internet, how evolves the reading and the writing through. It could be the cities, it could be also different kind of text, it could be video games, it could be the social network, and all the things that happen in a normal classroom, right? In a normal classroom nowadays, right? With children and teenagers with, those new years, right? New ages.
Hi, I want to echo what the panelists already have said, and that no, we don't necessarily know what we think we know about the digital. And I'm faced with this every day. I'm on sabbatical right now. I'm reviewing data from 3 high schools, just trying to make some sense of what's going on. And I think I tend to bring a kind of romantic and maybe even triumphalist view sometimes to youth digital literacy practices, and to focus on the activism and the punching up, which certainly exists, and I've seen a lot of that. I've seen the ways that youth at one of the high schools banded together to protest a racist image that was created at one of the other high schools in the district, which led to a district-wide walkout orchestrated by the Black student unions, and really deeply powerful. I also see I'm reading interview data with one of the teachers saying, I've got kids who are taking pictures of me in class, and then they post it to social media, and I just hear kids starting to laugh during class, and I see all of their phones lighting up and their watches lighting up, and I don't know what's going on, and it's the worst. And it used to be that kids would pass a note, or they would, you'd have a class clown make a comment. She said I could deal with that because I knew it was happening. And, I find myself going back to some of the work that Lalitha and Elizabeth wrote about that center stage, backstage dialectic. And I think so much of what youth are doing critically with digital media and literacy has moved into this backstage space where we as adults aren't privy to it. Deliberately, we're not part of it. And so, yeah, how could we know what we think we know when we're just getting little snippets of it from around the edges? Shelby, I also want to echo Dr. Celia Ruiz's acknowledgement of you for bringing us all together. Thank you so much. And I'm a little under the weather, so that's why my voice doesn't sound right.
Thank you. Thank you all for that.
I would like to jump in the conversation saying that actually last week at the university, I was talking with my students asking, with artificial intelligence nowadays, specifically, what is going to be the role of teachers? Specifically, as Monica was saying, second language teachers in a Colombian context. So, and at the end of the debate ended in like a conflict. Now everybody's in a struggle. So what is going to be the role of teachers? And also with digital spaces, because the rapid pace of technological change, as you already mentioned, is evolving everything. So it's evolving education, it's evolving pedagogy, it's evolving literacy, and it's reshaping how we see the world. And now with the artificial intelligence, it's like faster that pace. So it's like we're like in a tornado. I don't know if it might serve that metaphor. However, I don't know if I'm feeling that it's also reinforcing these power dynamics and inequities that we are facing, it specifically in our Colombian context, in which we have rural schools with the only technology devices that arrive are books, notebooks, and something to write, and that's it. So talking about smartphones in which internet doesn't even arrive. So it's difficult to answer that question, because it's so rapid, the change, that we haven't had the time to stop and think. So it's like there's a South American author called Borges that I guess the translation is ficciones or fiction, something. I don't remember the translation of that tale, in which there's a Chinese looking something, a labyrinth, and he has to show himself or someone else's that he found that something that he was looking for, and that something else that he was looking for, it wasn't himself. So at the end of the day, I think as educators, we also have to put our students in that critical perspective of asking themselves that question as well, because it's not just having a phone or a notebook in this case in the rural areas, and showing them there are other possibilities of thinking a digital space.
I would like to add something also regarding the topic, going by the way that Pati is also talking about our country. And when we talk about rural spaces here in Colombia, it's that space where our teachers don't know what literacy really is. They are just having that conception about a literacy that is just in the part of the cognitive definition, that is just the development about reading and writing as skills. So when we are at the university in the master's program, for example, in the course of literacies, they found like a marvelous definition or a marvelous idea of literacy as a social practice. They don't know that part, because here in Colombia, we are just starting like with that. Last Friday, one of my students said that is the other side of the coin, right? Like knowing literacy as a social practice is what we really need in our students, is what teachers also need to offer to those students who need more attention, right? Because nowadays we said, okay, we have some students who have special needs, but if we continue with the idea of developing literacy as a development of skills, what is going to happen with those students who are having cognitive problems or cognitive disabilities? We are not taking them also to the other side of developing those digital spaces that we really don't know how to use them in favor of the education that they just use for social media interactions, okay? So I think that is a call also to know what the teachers around the world know about what literacy as the core concept is, in order to know how we are going to use those digital spaces.
I'm going to pick up on what Claudia is saying. So I spend quite a bit of time talking with teachers, talking sometimes with policymakers and folks who talk about digital literacy. And the interesting thing is, in answer to the question, do we know what we think we know? Unfortunately, most people are, well, fortunately, most people are asking, so does it matter? Does it make a difference? And to Claudia's point, the question is, what is it? And so I spend so much of my time trying to kind of gather up what researchers are talking about, because we thought that possibly the research community might kind of move the way forward in terms of thinking about helping us understand what it is. But unfortunately, I've written quite a few things, but there are many literature reviews. There are many meta-analyses. There are many empirical studies. But at the end of the day, when you look in those studies or you ask those researchers what they mean by, in this case, digital reading, most don't even have a definition. They're actually conducting empirical studies and have not even said, no matter whether it's narrow or not, I don't believe this, but for example, my study happens to be reading a paragraph that's in a PDF that's on a screen, what we might call screen reading. But somebody else might be looking at some of the spaces that you all are talking about, some of these really complex environments within which people read or write or make meaning. But when we put all of those things together and define them all as some digital reading, we pretty much are not able to draw any conclusions across any of those empirical studies to say digital reading works, or it's useful, or this is how we teach digital reading, or this is how we measure digital reading, because people aren't even operationalizing what it is. So from a research perspective and a pedagogical perspective, that becomes huge, because it means so many different things. And so I think we all need to kind of figure out, and not that it has to mean one thing, but at least when we're conducting studies or doing professional development, we say, in this context, we are talking about this. And so let's move that idea forward. So over time, we might actually be able to replicate this into a way that we can say that it's working or not.
I don't know that I have an addition to what you all are saying. My name's Rebecca Woodard. I'm an associate professor at University of Illinois, Chicago. It's great to see you all. I echo the thank you, Shelby, for gathering us too, in addition to like honoring folks' great work. One thing I'm thinking about is in all your words, how we're interrogating different concepts and ideas in the question itself. So do we really know what we think we know about literacy in digital spaces? And I heard Stephanie and Yolanda, you kind of interrogated the we. Who's the we? Who are we talking about? Julie, you just sort of interrogated literacy. What do we mean by literacy? What are we talking about here? Are we talking about the same things? And Julie, I know your work leans into reading in digital spaces. Mine sits with writing, which tends to be ignored a lot in conversations about digital literacy. And so I have to like constantly be making those claims, or I'm thinking about my colleague, Goldie Mohammed's work. She's always pushing us for expansive conceptualizations of texts, right? And how we're thinking about texts and how that relates to digital literacy. And then Monica and David, I feel like you all pushed us to think about digital spaces, like what's a digital space? And how is that layered with things like access and place and all these other kind of geography, these are really complex ideas. So I just want to like, appreciate the rich ways that folks are kind of bringing interrogation to the question itself to help us think in different ways. So thanks, y'all are amazing.
Well, I can ask a follow-up question then. As we think about, we're now more than 20 years into the 21st century, and NCTE's been navigating the definition of 21st century literacies, now literacy for a digital age. And we always think about what's next when doing policy work like that. How do you write something that will guide folks in the decades to come? So what is next? What do you think our next thing is?
I think I'll jump in because I've been trying to wrap my head around this. I think we all have been trying to wrap our heads around this. I feel like the biggest piece that it's hard to not say is generative AI. It's almost impossible not to say generative AI is the next thing we have to think about. And last semester, the conversations I happened to be having with people around generative AI, very different than the conversations that are happening right now. It's almost like week to week, something new comes out, people learn different things. And the conversations last semester were more around catching students, surveillance, fear. And even though there was a small group of us saying, well, wait a second, what do we need to know about this type of technology that might inform the ways we engage with students with this technology, the ways that we think about its affordances and definitely barriers, issues around ethics, right? There's all of this stuff. But then there was one conversation I had with a former colleague at Texas, and she said, well, because I was talking about using it to generate cold call emails, things that I don't want to really put a lot of thought into. This is great, positioning it as an assistant, write an email for X, Y, and Z, getting some text, obviously having to go back and do a little bit of work, but very minimal work on my end. So it was a productivity tool for me. And she said, but what if that means students don't know how to write emails? And she, that wasn't really the point. It was like, what genres, thinking about writing, Rebecca, will students not have or need anymore if generative AI is something that we are using to produce a lot of text or images or sound, right? We can keep going down the road. So I think that's one thing I'll put out there. And then the second piece is just the role of XR technologies and really thinking a lot more about immersive technologies. The piece for me is like, what is the data that's being collected? And so when we're doing work, particularly those of us who might be doing work in VR or AR, and we're using different digital tools where biometric data is also being captured. And we might be doing really interesting work with students with these tools in different virtual worlds, different speculative kind of design and world building work. But there's this really conflicted piece inside of me when I do that work around, I don't know what data you're generating, and I don't know who has access to it, and I don't know what they're doing, and I don't know what that means for the type of literacies you will have to develop to navigate this world in the next decade. And you will be navigating this world in the next decade. It will be, I mean, we see it with Amazon and Macy's. We can hold up our phone and picture our furniture in our house. So we're seeing this technology anyway. It'll just be more pervasive. So I'll pause there, because then I'm like, does Macy's have a picture of my house someplace? You know, just like at a basic level. And I don't have the answer to that. And so I feel like there's ethical questions attached to all of those pieces. So thank you.
I just wanted to thank Deetra for that really powerful insight, right? As the other day, I'm online with Warby Parker and trying on like the different specs, right? And so we read it as convenience, right? Not having to leave our homes, being able to do this, but at what expense, right? So just the comments that you just made have me pondering and thinking. And I don't want to necessarily say the downside. I know there's some sacrifice to all technologies, you know, from the pen to the iPad and the phone and so forth. But it's really made me pause to really think, you know, to what end and exactly what are we giving up? What are we opening ourselves to for the sake of convenience?
I'm going to build on what Yolanda just said, and it probably, maybe it doesn't have a space here, but I think one of my biggest worries in the future is thinking about when we shouldn't be using technology. Like what is going to happen to people and building relationships and you know, finding some balance of getting off of the, whether it's the phone or when, you know, Chat GPT already seems to be able to generate text in any genre. And so then the question is, so if computers or technology can do that, what are we going to use our human brains for? So that if they don't become extinct, I suppose, you know, what, Mark Prensky a while back, I'm not a fan of his work with digital natives necessarily, but he talks a lot later, more recently, about digital wisdom and how are we going to come up with the brain power to know when to use technology and when not. You know, I see my daughter happens to be a school counselor in middle school, and I see so many children who are missing out on any kind of ability to build relationships and communicate. And so I think that for me in the future, it's just how do we find a balance? What does balance even mean? And how do we make sure that our humanness, our humanity, if you will, stays intact or maybe gets a little better even.
I would like to add something, Dr. Coiro. I was wondering is how to humanize those digital spaces or those digital spaces that we don't know where are they, right? And also because you mentioned something about the use of this technology, the iPhones and all cell phones and everything. But sometimes I wonder is what kind of messages are we going to send through those media if we are not thinking? I mean, we are sometimes just like in a new automated way, because I feel sometimes with my students that sometimes that when we use some digital resources, they are doing it just like as in a automatic way, right? Just like a pressing, clicking here, clicking there. But sometimes I'm wondering if they are really like a reflecting, thinking, trying to go beyond, because we know that we have students that really think in a very smart way, but sometimes there is like a group of students that just stay there like in a box, just in the box of clicking, and that's it. So I'm also wondering what is going to happen in the future, in the near future, what are they going to use those digital spaces for? Are just for, yeah, stop thinking and just clicking and clicking? Or are we going to do something as educators, right, to help them? We have mentioned it also, critical literacy, right? But we're going to do to go to that instance if they are just being in that part or doing in a very easy way, but not using the brains to create a message, to send that message. Also using the integration of modes, using multimodality. Later, where we're going to talk about multiliteracies, if maybe there is that problem at the very beginning of the situation when creating a message to later send it. So I'm wondering about that.
I appreciate you opening up the critical space, or opening further, right, our conversation into the critical space. And it's been difficult for me to insert myself into the conversation because I feel a little intimidated by the brilliance of everybody in the room. So, by the way, it's good to be in community with y'all. My name is Earl Aguilera. I'm an assistant professor at Fresno State out here in the Central Valley of California. And, we've been talking about or talking around some of these issues, and I really appreciate everybody kind of making the clarifications and allusions. And although I hesitate to make any kind of broad claims about what I mean next for kind of the digital literacy space writ large, because, as we've established, it's so broad. Secondly, it's so dynamic, right, and constantly changing with the everyday practice of society. And then, as Dr. Coiro brought up, it's also very ill-defined, and that whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, right, that's I think a reality that we all seem to converge on. So I'll just speak very briefly to the critical, right, and the critical digital literacy space, and thinking with folks like Ruha Benjamin and Bettina Love and Roberto DeRuque. I think for us, what appears to be next, or at least on the horizon, right, for critical digital literacies, is an evolution toward abolition, right, and an abolitionist perspective on literacies, right, and I'll very quickly hasten to add, right, thinking with Ruth Wilson Gilmore, abolition not simply as an act of dismantling, although yes, if we would like to have a planet to look forward to in the future, if we'd like to have humanity to look forward to and a livable future, yes, we are going to have to dismantle things like the prison industrial complex, things like racial capitalism. They will need to go. And at the same time, we also need to be actively working, right, toward building the world that we want to live in. And so I think for us, I think within the critical digital space, right, our questions are centering around how can critical digital literacies and the tools be marshaled, right, in the advancement of an abolitionist perspective. And sometimes that just means that means, that can mean taking everyday radical acts, right, in the direction of, right, the world that we want to live in. So Dr. Price Dennis talked about, ChatGPT and generative AI, and how in so many of our everyday, right, so much of our everyday discourse is focused on, and this is the part you may want to edit out, what Jeffrey Morrow terms cop shit, right? It's like, how do we continue to practice cop shit? That's a very technical term in the classroom, right? And so thinking about all of that, I guess these are just sort of some tentative first thoughts, but at least within the critical digital spaces, these are the kinds of conversations that seem to be emerging.
I just want to say that was so beautiful, and really what you had me think about, Professor Aguilera, is marginalized folks. I just spent the weekend at the Beyond the Bars conference, 10th annual Columbia University, and being with friends who are formerly incarcerated, and just hearing them speak and their critiques of the system, and certainly schools, right? we often are just thinking about those who are maybe the students in our classrooms, those that we have everyday contact with, but are we really thinking about, those who we don't always see or always talk with, and what their access and what their thoughts and their uses of digital technologies are? So just thank you for bringing in just the idea, right, of approaching this from an abolitionist perspective and making me think about those who actually have been put behind bars. And as we see more and more of the school to prison pipeline in full effect, what does that mean? How should we be thinking, and who should we be in community with when we are thinking about this? Thank you so much.
So as we think about the origin of digital spaces, there was a time where this new frontier, these new horizons were full of creativity and places to dream and wander. And more recently, they've become places that have been weaponized and filled with such hatred for various cultures and peoples. And it reminds me of the doability doctrine, and it's something that I try to live by in my work as an educator and my work as a scholar. And ultimately, when our interests are clear and our values are at stake, we can make a difference. We have to act and we have to lead. So I'm wondering, as we wrap up our conversation today, in what ways can we act and lead to ensure that the digital spaces that we all interact in different ways, and with our students, with ourselves, and with our work, are ones that promote humanity, as Julie said, and promote abolitionist thinking and move us towards a place where things can be better for the next generation.
In listening to the range of conversations and contributions earlier, which I think are all really smart and thoughtful, one of the things that keeps coming into my head is this issue of agency. I think a lot of times when we talk about digital literacy and digital spaces, we're very focused and enamored with access. And we don't necessarily consider the implications of agency. And, to go back to some of the previous comments, youth today and adults today too. I mean, my mom is in her 70s. We are, as a culture, entirely saturated with digital spaces. And part of the problem, one of the unintended consequences of that saturation, is that we as a global society have not been equipped with, have not taken the time to understand how to decipher the quality of these various spaces, to decipher the ways that it is responsible to engage with others and these spaces themselves. And so, when the pandemic lockdowns were happening, there were a lot of overwhelmed guardians, parents, and so kids were just online interminably, right? I mean, they were there because everybody was in survival mode. And I don't know that we've necessarily shifted back from that. And there's a range of reasons for that. But what that means is that societally, we're still online. And so, the question earlier about, like what happens to our brains, I don't think our brains are decaying necessarily like Ray Bradbury style, but I do think, and I think that these youth and adults, like we're thinking all the time in these digital spaces, but the ways that we're thinking are not necessarily agentive. And so what's happening is that we're often left to decipher for ourselves whether something is misinformation, disinformation, whether, this is a place I need to be in, this is a place that is healthy and safe for me to be in. And so you have, to go back to some of the previous comments, you have situations where students are posting videos online, posting images online, posting various statements online, joining online communities, employing and buying others' fake identities, fake information. And adults do that too. I mean, it is remarkable to me how dumb adults are in digital spaces sometimes. I mean, like how many of us have seen social media posts where someone has like copy paste ridiculousness of like, if you don't want Facebook to have your data, post this to your page. And the fact that adults are sitting there doing that and thinking like, I have shown them, I own my content now, tells me to what degree this really, in many respects, is about agency. Like the access is never going to go away. I think that the pandemic pushed us to a place where like the saturation is in our bones. And so now it becomes for me a question of how do we ensure that this saturation of access becomes one of agency and intentionality, and not just simply participation in ways that are potentially hurtful for ourselves and others.
Stephanie, I really appreciate that. And it's reminding me a little bit of what Earl, you talked about earlier. The part of what we have to do is stop with the cop shit in schools, right? We have to make space to like engage with the digital, and we have to push for that. Another thing I keep thinking about, a lot of my recent work has been on working with teachers on teaching about climate change with children. And the climate movement really has done a lot of work with intergenerational coalition building, right? And maybe part of how we kind of, Shelby, your question was, how do we act and lead? Is building those intergenerational coalitions, right? Like I think we've heard from like youth and elders, like there's all sorts of ways we could be building coalitions to kind of like imagine the kinds of schools we want. I think a lot about school transformation, and there's lots of other ways we can think about education outside of school. But like, so just as like a tiny little space that I'm trying to push on with folks is just more space for play with digital tools for kids, for little kids in school, because like it's so limited. My colleague Haney Yoon does a lot of work with kids, little kids, and just like it is about access and agency, but making school spaces where we can play and where we can dream and where we can imagine and where we can interrogate and do the kinds of work that we think is important. And one other example just something that I'm excited about in my own work is with the Chicago Area Writing Project. We've been trying to build coalitions of teachers who are trying to write towards civic engagement. And part of that is, a lot of that work is digital, right? But a lot of the work is thinking about literacy as it ties to action, and how can we do things, and how can we elevate our voices in conversations that matter, right? And part of what we're grappling with, and we're just beginning this work together, is finding space to do that, physical space and mental space and spiritual space, right? To like be in community and to like lift our voices with intention in conversations that matter. So that's some work that I'm really excited about, that I think is about acting and leading, and is about bringing folks together in ways that matter. It's hard. Like I don't think we have all the answers. We've been doing some op-ed writing, and we're also trying to interrogate op-ed writing as like a lever for change, but also kind of think about it. And then we're also thinking about story and other kinds of writing and how they might fit into that vision and that future. To me, those are some of the spaces as coalition building, and thinking about literacy and action and criticality and how those pieces might fit together.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, Rebecca. And it just gave me like two thoughts, about how do we lead, how do we act. And I think part of what we have to do is also show people what happens when our words on paper and our actions in our real lives are aligned. Because often that disconnect gets in the way, and it really does mask the issues that we really want to talk about. And so part of it is what's happening right now in 2023 that's creating dehumanizing spaces for our children and families, and for us just as human beings. So having that radically honest conversation about what's happening right now, and then maybe we can start to dream about the role of digital tools, possibly as maybe one of the things in the bag of tricks that's towards healing. Like, what if media making and production oriented digital literacies could be something that could bring healing, that could connect our humanity? And that's a different question, right? But if we don't ask what's getting in the way now, the tools just get added to all the horrible stuff. And then you just, so anyway, I'm not saying that as articulately as I'm feeling it in my heart, but I think you get the point. If we don't name the things that are getting in the way now, they're going to be exacerbated. And then they're 24 hours if people aren't disconnected.
And if I might, all this, it all just sparked so much. My mind is exploding. Shelby, I know you're trying to end, but my gosh, when you get together these minds and these hearts, this is what happens. But Dietrich, thank you so much for bringing healing in, and whoever else said humanity, and then you built on that. Because when I think about COVID-19 and that space of these last 3 years, I have to say that the work that I've been learning from and working with Dr. Angela Acosta, all of that has been built online. All of that with the Acosta Institute, Archaeology of Self, podcasts that offer people to engage in listening to how other people are healing their stories, and then inviting them into. So, you know, I'm thinking of the tactical, the practical. I mean, I know we are also talking about the theoretical and so forth, but I'm thinking that on a practical level, yes, people have operationalized the digital space of Zoom, of Teams, as a form of inviting people to heal. And I've been part of that community for the past 3 years. And we've had people from Australia, from all over the world, to come in at the same space to heal. And so thank you for that reminder that it can be a humanizing space and a healing space.
Well, I would like to continue with that conversation because you now are providing me a lot of ideas to continue working with my school students, because I also work in a public school here in Medellin. And we work like at creating different spaces for using multiliteracies and things like that. But sometimes it happens to me at this moment that sometimes as educators, we just like start thinking in just one part of the issue, right? I was like, yes, what is going to happen next? What is going to happen next? But I wasn't thinking about what is happening now. And what is happening now in my school is that they are using also those digital spaces in a very positive way, because I also try to link all the theory to the emotional component of my students. So through the newspaper, the podcast, or through YouTube channel or Facebook, that we are using all those digital spaces, right? We are sending positive messages. It could be just as simple as saying positive affirmation in a TikTok to let all students know they are using the English language, right? As simple as that. But the point is that it happens to me is also like emerging new ideas for started working with my students in the way of leading and, hey, money, agency, think out, doing something else with them. And we can also like promote this part of humanize the platforms or the media in general. But it's true that sometimes when we read the theory and also in the way that we are understanding the theory, like we forget those small things that really connects with the real life, right? So that was a very nice, like a cool, or like help me to remember that part. Thank you so much.
You know, I think we need these spaces more than ever to be humanizing. As you know, here in the US, official spaces during the school day are being outlawed, right, and criminalized. I just can't imagine the informal spaces that exist outside of the school day ever being more important, where, you know, young people can say gay and can talk about their Blackness and can talk about all of the things that elected officials are regulating away from them discursively, right? Saying you're not allowed to do that in school. I mean, God, how could it ever be more important than to have spaces, to create spaces, to sort of misuse spaces the way that they were originally intended for activist aims? I mean, I'm actually really glad that they have those spaces right now, to go in and be subversive, even in ways that, to take this all the way back to the beginning, we don't necessarily understand as adults. I think I'm okay with not understanding if it's powerful and generative for them, for the youth.
wanted to pick up on what David said, but really what everybody was saying about, I guess for me, the irony of when I talk with so many teachers, they still think about literacy as text, which kind of drives me crazy. I guess that's on the recording now, but here we are talking about spaces, environments, practices, and yet in the classroom, it's just so constrained to this thinking about this text with words, and how are we going to decode them, and all of these other very cognitive kinds of things, which I'm an educational psychologist. Of course, cognition is important, but really create, more and more trying to help teachers understand that learning is about creating spaces for kids through which they can demonstrate their agency, but the creation from the teacher side even it should be very intentional, should be very purposeful, and thinking about meaning making, or dare I say literacy, or dare I say reading, as engaging with other people in a space around things that are important to you and that matter to you, I think becomes really, really important for us to try and get that message out there. And then once in that space, whether it's through Zoom, or whether it's through the internet, or whether it's through some kind of space that's not through technology, fine, then we can start to think about how we engage with text, if you will, for the purposes of either learning or interrogating text, or reflecting on and talking about text, rather than just thinking that reading and writing or literacy is this act of reading a paragraph or writing a paragraph. And it seems simple, but it's such a huge task. And we're all in this space, it all makes sense. But how do we get the word out when we're talking with, I don't know, people that it doesn't make sense for, in a way that, so that I think is we know what we don't know, or we clearly don't know how to do that. I don't remember quite how you framed the question, Shelby, but I think we have a long way to go. And I did want to say thank you for creating this space. Again, we're not in person, but just an opportunity to listen and think and voice different people's perspectives under the auspices of, taking action and leading is just really exciting. So thank you.
Thank
Sorry, I know
you.
we keep,
Go ahead, Earl, please.
I
Go
was gonna
ahead.
say, I know we keep on delaying the wrap up, but as folks share, so many things come to mind. I'll just very briefly share a bit. What I really loved about that particular reflection, Dr. Guerrera, is it really reminds us of kind of what, I don't know, for me personally, right, it reminds me of what brought me to this space, right, the literacy space in the first place. And when I speak with our students about the learning sciences, one of the fundamental conclusions we have in class was that as humans, we can't not learn, right? It's all in the same way, right? As for communication theorists, we can't not communicate, right? For learning scientists, we can't not learn. And I think for us as literacy professionals, we can't not be literate. We can't not be digitally literate, because that is just part of the social fabric, right? Of what so many people are and what so many people do today. And while it is true that some people can be rendered, right, illiterate by social structures and by institutional structures, that doesn't change the reality that we're always making meaning about the world. So anyway, I don't know where that point was going, but just some first draft thoughts, and again, always very inspired to be in community and just learning with all of you.
Well, I've always said that the best professional development for educators is just clearing out the room and letting teachers circle around a table and talk about what's on their heart and what's working, and even more of what's not working and how to navigate that. And I think we've done that together today with your brilliant insights on the current state of affairs, as well as where we go next and where our journey takes us. And I think beyond acting and leading, I'm taking away humanity today from our conversation, healing from our conversation, tactical to practical from our conversation today. And I hope that the folks watching the video today are as inspired as I have been from you just sharing with us, all of you, your perspectives on, do we know what we think we know? And I think we have a lot of work to do in the years to come in these spaces. So thanks to all of you for your contributions, and be on the lookout for 2024 Divergent Award nominee opportunities for colleagues in the field. We hope you will nominate someone to be a part of us. So thank you so much for your participation.